Basically, every top trend on Twitter right now is about New Zealand and Christchurch. There's a lot of information that's coming out that's hard to confirm. There are reports that there were multiple shooters. It's been reported by some that at one of the mosques, someone had a gun and fired back and chased away the shooters. For those of you that aren't familiar with what happened, a man with an arsenal, a massive, with guns, stormed into a mosque, and I believe he killed 49 people. The whole thing was live streamed. The video is available everywhere. I've seen it. I've also looked through his manifesto. And I'm not, necessarily going to talk about the details of the incident because information is still coming out. It's hard to know what's true and what isn't. But there are a few very important things that I want to talk about the issue, and I'll probably leave it there and do videos on other things today, if possible. If possible. I mean, the news is dominated by this. His stated intention, and I'm not going to show his manifesto, but his stated intention was to accelerate the culture war. We have, right now, we're in a civil war. We are in it. It's just not gotten to that point where two massive armed factions are fighting in the streets or anything like that. We have seen various street skirmishes with some people have been armed, but, in Charlottesville, someone did take a shot. And that's kind of been like the peak escalation of the ultimate threat would happen in Charlottesville. But we've seen people fighting in the streets. And now we have potentially one, maybe more, people engaging in this coordinated act of violence. The man claimed that he was a uniformed partisan. He didn't view it necessarily as an act of terror, though it was. And he didn't seem, it seemed like an overt political action. We have in this culture war, which is a looming civil war, if you were to ask me, identitarians on one side and everyone else in the middle. The identitarian left is substantially less prone to acts of lethal force, and the identitarian right is substantially more likely to successfully pull these things off. The identitarian left is more likely to pull off low-scale things that are sometimes annoyances, sometimes rather violent, put people in the hospital, but aren't the most egregious. And this is why you'll end up hearing a lot about what the identitarian left does, because they do it a lot. However, you'll hear about these key moments from the identitarian right because they're substantially more forceful and lethal. The goal, in my opinion, from both of these groups is to try and rope people in the middle who oppose identitarianism into joining a side. In the manifesto, the guy says straight up that he was doing it because he wanted the left in the United States to try and restrict the rights of Americans so that the right would feel like their liberty was being taken away and fight back. He was hoping that this would lead to a rapid balkanization, and the only outcome ultimately would be race war, that people would be forced to draw lines. There's a reason why I absolutely detest any and all identitarians. I mean, I guess if you're, even the identitarians who are nonviolent on the left, and they exist, and on the right they exist, they still are part of this civil war. They're still a part of the ideology trying to split people. And from where I, am growing up in a diverse neighborhood with, friends of all different backgrounds and races, and, me specifically not being able to, even if I wanted to associate with any of these fringe weirdos on the left or the right. I just don't, I think what they're doing is it's going to lead to violence, death, harm. In the video, the guy said, subscribe to PewDiePie. He also named Candace Owens specifically. Someone posted this to Reddit, and I want to read this. They make a good point. Someone said, actually, it matters a lot. I don't know what they're referring to. The guy's manifesto makes it clear why he said subscribe to PewDiePie. It's because he wants to create division and conflict. He wants the media to go after PewDiePie and his fans. He wants to accelerate the culture war. Everything about the attack was cultivated for that end. From the choice of victims to the weapons to the people he references, he knows Felix won't approve of his actions. He knows Felix wants nothing to do with him. He is associating himself with PewDiePie because he wants to see Felix condemned with that association. He wants the mainstream media to run with the narrative that PewDiePie and his supporters are alt-right or fascist adjacent. If the media falls for the bait, and they already have, then we'll see the murderer's ultimate plan fulfilled. YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook will likely be his unwitting pawns as they crack down on problematic people like PewDiePie. If this isn't addressed, then the numbers will have not only been a horrific crime, but they will also have been a mission success from the perspective of the killers. They cannot be allowed to succeed. So it is actually important here that the regular combatants in the culture war lay down their weapons and refuse to fight over this. If they want, if they don't, then the killers will get exactly what they want. It's too late. The machine churns along, nothing can stop it. And I sat here staring at my phone, staring at Twitter, thinking, what can I do to stop the people shrieking as loud as possible and pointing the finger at each other? When I see people on one side or the other start talking about how it's the left or it's the right, there's nothing I can say to them that wouldn't exacerbate the problem. There's no person I can respond to saying, hey, what you're doing is making things worse. It will only be seen as another partisan attack. There are people on the left and the right who are engaging this behavior, saying that it's one group or the other. But the reality is, regardless of whether or not you want to accept it, it's the extremist factions of both sides that are desperately trying to pull us in. They want us to join one of the factions. This is the recruitment phase. The violence is here. The violence is getting worse. The rhetoric in media, the control of institutions, and they need foot soldiers. How do they get it? It's exactly as this man described. Everything he did, the intention was to foment this culture war. There are people on my side who don't like any identitarians, who believe in freedom of expression, the right to self-expression, the right to associate and have conversations. And there are people who want to take that away. In my opinion, these are the true factions. The identitarian side, for the most part, agrees with the left and the right. They hold basically similar views. They agree on so many points. They're just at odds over the color of each other's skin, anti-white or pro-white or whatever. They need people who are uninitiated, who resist identitarianism to fight on their side. As he stated, he wants to create this balkanization so that it will force people who believe in freedom to choose a side. They want this war to come. I'm going to pull up a tweet from Michael Tracy, who brought up this point. He said his reason for bringing up a figure like Candace is to embolden American liberals and leftists to more aggressively restrict the Second Amendment, thereby fomenting political strife and a violent backlash. Michael said, I am choosing not to post excerpts on Twitter, but that's my initial read. What he fundamentally advocates is fascistic accelerationism. He self-identifies as a fascist. He perceives the principal enemies of that objective to be conservatives, especially U.S. conservatives, although the attack took place in New Zealand, his main political focus is the U.S. So rather than help him achieve his stated objective, fomenting political strife in the U.S., you'd hope that U.S. media would exercise caution and not start leveling wild, ill-considered charges. However, I'm not optimistic. Michael is right. The media has already started. We are already seeing the blaming of one faction. I have to be honest, I don't understand how you could ascribe left or right to any of these people, but they have. And that's typically how we view it. And I feel I've been feeling in the past few weeks that I need to make sure I just draw the distinction between far left and regressive left or identitarian left. And I'll do better in the future to make sure that distinction is clear. The identitarian left and the identitarian right are two sides of the same coin that believe basically the exact same things. Don't take my word for it. They've actually said as much publicly. The identitarians on the right consider themselves on par with Black Lives Matter. And we've seen black identity extremists take, in I believe it was in Dallas, I could be wrong, firing at police officers. We've seen, I lived a block away. I lived on Myrtle and Nostrand in Brooklyn when a black identity extremist executed a Hispanic and an Asian cop. So the escalation has been happening over the past several years. And here's what's going to happen. The machine keeps churning. People can't help themselves. People are pointing the finger at PewDiePie, who had nothing to do with this at all, because it worked. What this man did, it's working. I'm watching activists on the left say things that are very clearly baiting one side of the culture war to exacerbate or to accelerate exactly as he intended. I've tried telling people, don't give him what he wants. He's trying to bait you into fighting with the right, only to have them snap back and start shrieking at me about how it's my fault, it's the right's fault, it's whatever faction, anti-SJW, it's the intellectual dark web. These people who refuse because they can't help it. Nothing's going to change. I want to make one more point, and I mean this. I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but I want to talk about the right way and the wrong way to respond to being dragged by someone like this. PewDiePie's official response was, just heard news of the devastating reports from New Zealand Christchurch. I feel absolutely sickened having my name uttered by this person. My heart and thoughts go out to the victims, families, and everyone affected by this tragedy. I think PewDiePie has been dragged enough to know what the best thing he can do is just say that, that his heart goes out and he's sickened by it. And this was the right way to do it. I mean this not to be disrespectful in any way. My personal opinion is that upon finding out Candace Owens had her name mentioned by this psychopath, she probably started sweating bullets. She probably started just having an anxiety attack. That's forgive the expression. I just realized maybe that was a poor choice of words, but it's an expression that means you're having an anxiety attack. You're terrified. And Candace Owens immediately started putting out a string of tweets where she said, ha ha ha, oh my God, LOL. Because I don't think she understood how to actually respond to this guy claiming she had something to do with what happened when clearly she doesn't. It seems like his intention in naming her was to discredit her, to give fuel to one side of the culture war, to point the finger at her because she pushes back. There's not just one faction in the culture war. There isn't. It's not just left and right. There are people on the left who oppose war and believe in freedom of speech. There are people on the right who oppose authoritarian restrictions on speech, but also identitarianism. And these are like the center categories that are at odds with each other. And it's the extremists who are trying desperately to make sure they can rope people in to their side. And it's working. They're going to weaponize this against PewDiePie and Candace Owens. They're going to use everything this guy said, even though he admitted what he was doing, because he knew. This guy knew full well that he could admit his intention was to weaponize, to provide arms in the culture war. He wanted to make sure that people on either side could point the finger. He knew that if he did exactly what he did, as he described it, he knew even though he admitted he was doing this for this reason, one faction will latch onto it and point the finger, and the other side will react. It worked. The media is on board. They can't let a good crisis go to waste, as they say. They're going to use this to generate traffic, to make money. They're going to point the fingers to the left and the right. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This is going to be my last video on the issue. I'm going to talk about other things completely unrelated to what's going on, to the best of my ability. News may break. If something is extremely important, I will do my best. But I'm going to try and do videos today about things that are rather unrelated and maybe just more interesting. And I'm gonna avoid letting this man's plan work. I just don't understand, how you stop the machine from doing what it does. I can see right now exactly what he wanted, and I won't give it to him. I see people on Twitter, and I see the urge to tell one person on the left or the right, like, you are doing this, you are playing the game. And as I mentioned earlier, I know that it doesn't matter. Even saying that will be considered a partisan attack. The machine will just keep churning, and he has pushed that snowball down the hill. It's already barreling. If I was to make a prediction, I've said repeatedly that we're at the front gates of some kind of civil conflict. And I think it's funny because for the past year I've been talking about the increased escalation. I wasn't wrong. I have not been wrong yet. Admittedly, it's hard to be wrong when we're talking about either it escalates or it doesn't, because there have been quiet periods. But this is a dramatic escalation. There may have been 4 people involved. We don't know. I believe there are 3 people in custody. I believe they have the man in custody. But at any rate, this man was very clearly active in one extreme faction in the culture war. He knew his internet lingo. He name-dropped people. He knew what he was doing, how it would play out, and he was right. And now everyone's giving him what he wants because they can't help it. It's an addiction. I think the division is so fierce at this point between left and right. Nothing can bring people back together. I see the typical people on the on the far left and the far right saying this, that, and this, this, that, and this. This is exactly what we can expect. It's your fault. It's your fault. There's nothing you can do. I thought about, I've been thinking for a while, what could be done to stop the dramatic escalation? What can be done to bring people together? And then I think about the fundamental fracturing of reality between the two factions that can never be mended. On one side, you have issues of, I don't even want to say it. I'm not going to get into it. But you have issues in the culture war where people on the left and the right both believe that either side is denying science, which is objective reality. And if neither side can agree on what is true in the physical world, in our reality, there literally is nothing you can do to mend it. Nothing. And so the only thing I see happening is I think the division is impossible to mend at this point. And so this man's intention of accelerating things can only work. And it is. One last thing I'll say. I've talked, on the Joe Rogan podcast with Jack Dorsey, I mentioned the darkness. And Jack talked about it too. That you push people into these extreme pockets when you ban people, when you shut them down. Jack said that someone from the Westboro Baptist Church was de-radicalized by being on the platform and being exposed to other people's views. It's also been reported that this man spent too much time in an echo chamber of extremist opinion. And I believe that's true. And I believe the more these platforms restrict, it's a Chinese finger trap. The solution to the problem is counterintuitive. You need to let more people speak, vent their anger, and talk about these issues. But when you take away their ability to do so, when you take away their ability to function, and when you put people who, to use the analogy of drugs, who smoke a little pot, you put them in with hardcore offenders and murderers, you get extremism. We're on that path and nothing will stop it. Because the simple solution, the obvious solution is sometimes wrong. The knee-jerk reaction is sometimes wrong. Don't be impulsive. But they can't help it. People are going to scream, ban them all. Ban this group, ban that group, and it'll work. And they will. They're already talking about how Facebook, Google, Twitter, and these platforms are facilitating these videos and these conversations. They'll take them down. They will restrict the conversation. People will find new echo chambers to become radicalized in, and it will only make it all worse. And they know it. Jack Dorsey told me he knew it. He said on the podcast he thinks about it every day, that he's pushing people into the darkness. Congratulations. Nothing can stop it. I think 2 more years. That's my prediction. Could be wrong. I say this every time we see some kind of dramatic escalation. I could be wrong. These people are evil. What this man did was calculated, cold, psychotic, and evil. He wants to recruit you. He wants to push one side to push back on the other and force you to draw lines in the sand. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. When this thing escalates, I won't. I'll absolutely never join these psychopaths. No, I'm talking about left and right. Obviously, as I mentioned, they don't like me for who I am and for what I am, for where I come from, and this has always put me at odds with identitarians. You can't have someone who's too white or not white enough. And this is why I think these people are dangerous extremists. But it'll work. Because identity groups, the identitarianism has been expanding. It has been getting worse. And I think we're going to see it get dramatically worse. And you know what I'll do? I'll leave. I won't allow this to continue and to do what they want it to do. You'll notice whether or not, because there are people accusing me of playing a hand in this for absurd and nonsensical reasons. I have maintained my position of respecting everyone based on their civil rights, downplaying the extremist narratives of even the right when it comes to issues like migration, when it comes to issues of religion. It doesn't matter, though. It does not matter. The lines have been drawn. I'm going to leave it there. We'll see what happens the rest of the day, but thanks for hanging out. I hope thoughts and prayers, my condolences. I just don't know what the solution is. I really don't.